Well, I am thankful for the opportunity to get to present a lesson to you today. I hope it's beneficial. After all those years and months of getting to build up a library, and you still have trouble picking what you want to preach on, but I think this will be beneficial. It says there, if you look, he was useless. He was useless, and it mentions the book of Philemon. And of course, being useless, that's a put down, isn't it? We're familiar with that in our language. And we say someone's useless, still common in language today. And it's definitely not something we want to hear about ourselves, is it? You don't want your boss to say that about you, or people of the church, or even your spouse say, he's useless. That's not good. And when it comes to the book of Philemon, some of you might have already been thinking as Bible students, one chapter, I know what's in that book, is Onesimus. Onesimus is in that book, and he was a slave. And it's possible he'd escaped. Don't know that, he'd committed a crime and ends up in prison, but it turns out, as I stated this a little bit, there's certain doctrines and teachings of others that say he stole stuff, and they've made him a saint. Well, anybody that obeys God's a saint. So we're all saints here that are Christians. But so you might study a little on Onesimus, but it seems he's escaped or a crime. Somehow, some way, he's ended up in prison with Paul. And Paul, of course, meets him and converts him. And there's a lesson in this already, that we hear things said that are not in the Bible. And whether it's doctrines that have been created or just misheard or repeated, and then down through the ages changes, you need to pick your Bible up and make sure what you hear is right. Because there's a lot of things said about even just Onesimus that are not actually in the Scriptures. But here, as we look at this slave, Onesimus, in Philemon 1, verses 10 through 11, it says, I appeal to you. This is Paul talking to Philemon in his letter. He says, for my child, Onesimus, whose father I became in my imprisonment. Formerly he was useless to you, but now he is indeed useful to you and to me. So you can't help but tell from that language, we are confident he converted Onesimus. He said that same stuff about Timothy. This is like my child in the faith. This is my child. I'm his father in his imprisonment. And what he said about him there, if you look at that word, inefficient, detrimental, unprofitable, useless. He said this guy, we look at all these versions up here, English Standard Version, useless. And several have unprofitable. The International, I think it is Standard Version, useless. This guy, Onesimus, this slave at one point, was useless. No good whatsoever came out of this guy for us. So we should have retrospect right now. Am I useless? Whether it's at your job or in the home, or we hope today we need to be thinking about spiritual things here. Am I useless? Would the Lord say this person is useful to me? Might say, am I being useful? That's the question. Am I being useful? It's kind of like a parable, isn't it? What we're seeing out of Onesimus. We have Onesimus on one side, we have us on another. He was a servant, a slave of Philemon, apparently not by choice, because it seems he was trying to get out of it. We are to be a slave of God by choice. And Onesimus, it seems, had shirked duty, was useless, but he's becoming converted and changed here in prison. He's willing to go back and serve and be useful. And of course, that's the exact same thing for us in the Lord. That we have been possibly shirking duty, not involved at all, not even a Christian yet maybe, and we're useless to the Lord in that state. But we can change. We can be converted. We can have zeal that we talked about even in the adult class, and we can be useful to the Lord. Before we move on from Onesimus, I'll say one other thing. If you look over there, I just happened to notice this in the last day or two. If you look at his name, the definition is profitable. Now, I can't help but think that that somehow was a surname. Now, we do not know this. This is where these things you need to study start out. Somebody says something like this and somebody, no, I do not know, but it's pretty odd that this book of a slave who was useless and then his name means profitable. I would say this came to be because of this very thing that we now call him Onesimus. Who knows, maybe Paul had been corresponding with Philemon along, and Philemon is aware. Maybe he came up with this surname, and this happens to be. He's like, hey, let's get this Onesimus, this profitable guy, back to you and to me. Well, moving on from Onesimus, here we have a verse, being useful here. You are the salt of the earth. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill can't be hid, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to the whole house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. There's so much in that. I talk about these children's songs. You can go your whole life, and just those children's songs are enough to have the knowledge you need to be useful to God. There's a lot about salt and letting your light shine and things. As we look at this verse here, the English Standard Version said it's no longer good. That's what we just read, that it's no longer good. But if you look at every other translation, it's pretty interesting. Good for nothing. Henceforth, good for nothing. Good for nothing. There's another phrase, isn't it? He was useless. Good for nothing. Isn't that something? Another word or phrase that's common in our language. If we let our salt, or we don't be the salt we need to be, we're useless. We're good for nothing. Another verse that relates to that says, Luke 14, verse 34-35, salt is good. But if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is of no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It is thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear. If salt is not being salt, if a Christian is not being a Christian, it's no good. It's no good. There's the word, what we're supposed to be is well placed and appropriate and fit and meet for use. We're to be useful to God. And notice the verse says of no use. We're not in the proper place or doing the right things. We're not fit for duty, if you will. We're not meet to do what we need to be doing if you've lost your saltiness. So here, salt and light, again, no use if you've lost your saltiness. No use if you don't let your light shine. It reminded me as I was reviewing this lesson of being virtuous. The word means manly. And sometimes it's hard when we're in front of people that are sinning. We're in the minority, and we just sit there and we don't stand for God or acknowledge I'm a Christian and I disagree with these things. Being salty or letting your light shine is when you're virtuous and you stand up and say, no, I believe in God, Jesus, I worship him, and I don't partake of these things. That's being salty. So you can be salty with your example, the morals you display, the words you speak. We're going to see some of that in this lesson. You can be salty, or letting your light shine with these things. The deeds you do, or you can use not to. You can just be ineffective. We studied the word indifference. Fits right in with this. I won't be salty. I'll just be indifferent. So if you've lost your saltiness or you hide your light, you're useless. You're good for nothing. So we have to choose, are we going to be useful or useless? Trying to be useful for the Lord. That's what we're talking about. We're trying to be useful, salty light for the Lord. As we start thinking about this, here's something Paul said to Timothy. 2 Timothy 2, verses 20-21. In a great house, there are not only vessels of gold and silver, but also of wood and clay, some for honorable use, some for dishonorable. Therefore, if anyone cleanses himself from what is dishonorable, he will be a vessel for honorable use, set apart as holy, useful to the master house, ready for every good work. There's a lot in those two little verses there. Different types of pots and pans. Some for great things, some for not so great things. So here, profitable and being meet for use. And there's different things here. It's not a perfect analogy and lineup, but you might look at some things that, that's not such a special dish. Oh boy, come to think of it, this just popped in my head. Somebody in my house had a little bowl full of ticks. That wasn't like a special vessel, but you wouldn't grab your special dishes and discard ticks in this bowl. That was not a special bowl. Matter of fact, that bowl went in the trash. After we're not going to use that bowl again. But there's special bowls, isn't there? For special occasions and things. Some for dishonorable use, some for honorable use. Which would you rather be? You want to be to your father or your spouse or not so special. Or this is the guy or the gal that, wow, they are special. I can pull them out on the special mission, if you will, and they'll get the job done. They are special. What do you want to be? So Paul had been talking about this Hymenaeus and Philetus and this, and he shows these are special vessels, or shows there are special vessels for common use. That's the point he was making about these other two guys. He wanted them to strive to be honorable or special vessels, fit for the master's use. We'll see those guys were not. And he wanted people to strive. Them too. Don't be like that. Strive to be useful vessels. As we go back up in 2 Timothy 2, verse 14 and 18, we see why they weren't special vessels. Here's what those guys were doing. Watch this. 2 Timothy 2, 14 and 18. Remind them of these things. Charge them before God not to quarrel about words, which does no good, but only ruins the hearers. Do your best to present yourself to God as one approved, a worker who has no need to be ashamed, rightly handling the word of truth. Avoid irreverent babble, for it will lead people into more and more ungodliness, and their talk will spread like gangrene. Among them are Hymenaeus and Philetus, who've swerved from the truth, saying that the resurrection's already happened, and they're upsetting the faith of some. So we see what these guys did, were involved in, that made them dishonorable. And when I restated this lesson again, something else jumped out to me. Let's look at what made them dishonorable. Quarreling about words. Wrongly dividing the word. Irreverent babble. Talking was spreading like gangrene. They were swerving from the truth. We're going to make a point on that in a second, but you're of no condition to serve the Lord if you have these problems. Irreverent babbling, wrongly dividing the word, not telling the truth, false doctrine. Watch this. It's interesting that all this dishonor related to words and talking, didn't it? Isn't that something? Now we know we need to live holy lives and purity, morality, but here, had you ever thought how much just words can make you unuseful to the Lord or being a dishonorable vessel? Think about that. That babbling and quarreling and teaching false doctrine and causing confusion to spread among the brethren makes you dishonorable, unuseful to the Lord, useless to the Lord. So we need to cleanse ourselves from what is dishonorable. And that not only is our sexual purity and things of this nature, it's even words, a lot to do with words. And we could just throw a lot of stuff in that pile of garbage, can't we? That involves words. If we get rid from us gossiping and quarreling and teaching false things and bearing tales and foolish jesting and lying and cursing, there's a lot we can get rid of. then we are ready for the Lord's work, aren't we? We can be useful then. If you're a talebearer and a liar and a quarreler and teaching false doctrine, the Lord can't use you. But we get rid of that. We get ready to use our words for good things. The Lord can use us. And this reminds me of the Lord, that inverted triangle. Seems unnatural to me to draw a triangle like you. I don't know about like that. I don't know about you, but you always put the big base on the wall. It's going to fall over if it's like that, right? But we often demonstrate God's ways with this, don't we? That it's the opposite of what man thinks. Great in God's eyes is that inverted triangle, and great in man's eyes is a different thing. Quarreling and trying to show your wisdom and knowledge. That's often why we run our mouths like that, isn't it? That we want to prove somebody, oh, I know what I'm talking about. I've got knowledge, or I'm right, you're wrong. But those that are willing, if you will, to work, get their hands dirty, be humble, teach humbly, that is what's great in the kingdom of God. So we see with man seeking honor, seeking riches. Oh, you're great. But with Jesus, humbly serving, ministering to others, teaching others, that is actually what makes you great, instead of riches and honor and things of that nature. So the opposite. And here is an example of a person in the Bible. 2 Timothy 4:11. Luke alone is with me, Paul says. Get Mark, or John Mark, and bring him with you, for he's very useful to me for ministry. And we see those who remember in the Bible, Mark wasn't always considered that way by Paul, was he? He chose to not be with him for a while. He chose to split ways, go another route because of John Mark. But we see John Mark becoming an honorable vessel, useful. Now, as we look at that, again, he was thought to be useless. He was this nephew of Barnabas. And we know Barnabas was a worker with Paul, very beneficial to Paul, and helping stand up for Paul and helping him get opportunities. But, at one point when John Mark had kind of left them, Paul's like, basically, I don't want to work with him again, ever. And so they split ways. But now he's finding him useful. Seems in the ministry, that teaching, maybe he was helping with Paul's needs too, but somehow, some way, Mark is being useful. and who knows, maybe Paul just started to understand him better. You ever been that way with somebody that it seemed like you couldn't get any work out of them, or you couldn't get along, and then over time you understood them better. You realized how they worked, or what motivated them, and then you were able to be successful working with that person. Maybe that's part of what happened here with Paul and John Mark. Maybe John Mark didn't change that much. Maybe Paul changed a little, and he is useful to me. So that could be another thing to learn from this. Maybe we can get along, figure out how to work together. Sometimes just misunderstanding, attitudes, we're not being effective together, and we start to understand each other, and we can be more effective together. We won't spend any time on this, but I'll flip it. And I was interested as I was studying, looked at some person's ideas, and they threw out, hey, how can you be useful to the Lord? And maybe something up there would stick out to you, but they threw out a lot of normal little phrases that you might not think about. Being useful to the Lord, loving enemies, watching your tongues, not seeking honor, just on and on that list goes. Binding yourself to the Lord, being the peacemaker. So there's tons up there of thoughts. You might look that up at home sometime, but there are many ways you can be useful to the Lord. You don't have to be up here or leading singing, or there's nothing in particular. There are many works to be done in the vineyard, being useful to the Lord. And another thought on being useful vessels, before we leave this one, trying to be useful vessels. I'll word it this way, and then I'll share a little more, that we're all vessels, and God has to wash us all, right? We're all vessels, and God has to wash us all. The way that happened, actually, I was doing dishes one day, And I think I had some of those nice glass dishes. And I was preparing that material many, many months ago, and I got that just thought popped in my head. And I thought, you know what, if God were a pessimist, that's the way he'd feel. You know, God does care if we're honorable or dishonorable vessel. But my thought at that moment was, you know, if God were upset, he'd be so frustrated with these dishes. Like, I have to wash every one of you. You know, that it don't matter if you're a fancy dish or a dirty dish, gotta wash it. But it's a neat thought, isn't it? God has to wash every one of us, no matter what, before we can get anywhere. So as we think, using our talents for God, be useful by using your talents and having an active faith. That's how we can be useful. Use our talents. Have an active faith. We're familiar with this, but Matthew 25, starting verse 24, he also had received a 1 talent, came forward. We know that there had been one, I think, with 5 and one with 2, and they gave an account of what they'd done with their talents. But this guy with 1 says, Master, I knew you were a hard man, reaping where you didn't, so gathering where you had not scattered seed. I was afraid. I went and hid your talent in the ground. Here, you have what's yours back. His master answered him, You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, that I gather where I haven't scattered. You ought to have invested my money with bankers, and in my coming I'd receive what was mine with interest. I'd get more back. Take the talent from him, give it to him that has 10 talents. Everyone who has will be given more. He will have abundance, but the one who is not, even that which he has, will be taken away. Cast, what kind of servant was it? Worthless servant into outer darkness, in that place where there'll be weeping and gnashing of teeth. A lot here. You can kind of see that just believing in the Lord or the Master is not enough. Even putting forth some effort might not be enough. You have to please the Master, do what he wants. That's in there. But this guy didn't do what the Master thought was right, and cast in outer darkness. He's worthless. The word that was used there was this word. He's unprofitable again. He's useless. And it's very similar to the word that was used for Onesimus. Just a slightly different form of that word. So kind of neat. Ties right in, because we're talking about the same word. Onesimus, at one point, was, if you will, that worthless servant. Same form of the same word. Unprofitable. James 2, which some have ripped out of their Bibles because they do not believe some of the things James said. But for hundreds of over 1,000 years, nearly 2,000 years, James has been considered inspired word of the canon. That they're confident. Bible students are confident. He wrote with inspiration. The scholars are. And what James said, chapter 2, verse 14, what good is it, brothers, if someone says he has faith but doesn't have works? Can faith save him? If a brother or sister is poorly clothed, lacking in daily food, one of you says, go be warmed and filled, and doesn't give him anything, what good is it? Also, faith by itself, if it doesn't have works, it's dead. But some will say, you have faith, I have works. Show me your faith apart from your works, and I'll show you my faith by my works. You believers, when God, you do well. But even the demons believe and tremble or shudder. Even the demons know there's Jesus God. That's not enough. Even they believe. Do you want to be shown, you foolish person, that faith apart from works is useless? It's useless. And he goes on and gives more. But this passage that James is saying here, faith apart from works is useless. And if you look at other translations, the one we look at, the version we were using, English Standard Version, is the only one that said it was like barren or not so good. But look at every other translation. Dead. Look, I'm lying to you. There's a few more that, I guess there are a few others that have that translation, but several dead. Some, look in here, barren. The word itself, if you look up in the Bible 132 times, and other than this verse, I'm confident everyone you look at, dead corpse. So this is one place I don't like the English Standard Version as much. James is saying is it's dead. I mean, that's what the word means. If you don't have works, your faith is dead. It is worthless. So, powerful language. I think even more powerful than barren. It is dead if you don't have works. You know, suppose Christ can raise you twice. I'll put it that way. That from being dead in this world and useless, you know, to him, we're dead in sins, aren't we? If we're not what we need to be. We are dead and useless in sins. And we can die to those sins and live for him and be useful. So then, at the end of time, in the resurrection, in the great day, in the judgment, he can raise you incorruptible, immortal, can he? Again, raised to share in his glory and honor. So he can raise you twice. He can make you useful in this life, take you away from that being dead in sin, and in the final resurrection, he can give you the crown of life, make something out of you. And again, we just want to emphasize, even if you have faith, I believe. Demons believe. They knew there was a place prepared for them. There are verses we could dig up for you. New Testament said, have you come to torment us before time, Jesus? They knew the end of their behavior. They knew who Jesus was. Doesn't mean they're saved. Just belief is not enough. Well, a confusing thought as we're getting close to the end here. Even when we're useful, we're still worthless. Meditate on that for that. There's scripture here to back this up. Jesus said this. Think about it. Even when you're useful, we're still worthless. Look here. Lord had just talked to him about forgiving 7 times and how difficult that is, what we've been studying. And the apostle said, increase our faith. This is not easy to be that forgiving, to behave the way God wants us to behave. But he goes on, Jesus says, if you had faith like a grain of mustard seed, you could say to that mulberry tree, be uprooted, plant in the sea, and it'll obey you. Will any of you who has a servant plowing or keeping sheep say to him when he's come in from the field, come at once and recline at the table. Take it easy. Will he not rather say to that servant that just came in from working all day like a dog and say, go make supper for me and dress properly and serve me while you eat and drink, and afterward, you'll eat and drink. Does he thank the servant because he did what he was told to do out there in the fields or even back in the house? Does he, oh, thanks a bunch for doing that, servant? No, kind of rhetorical. You also, when you've done all that you're commanded, say, we're unworthy servants. We've only done what was our duty. We need to realize that, don't we? We've not earned anything. We're not great. We're still sinners that deserve death. But our master is wonderful and great, and we're trying to serve him, and we're just glad, appreciative. We've only done what is our duty to do for a great master. So if we're still worthless, you will, why even try? Because of humble attitudes? Because we know that praising God, he deserves it? That's why I do it. These are reasons why, even though you'll still be considered worthless, why you do it. God deserves that praise and honor. We're servants of righteousness by our choice. I chose that way. When you love someone, sometimes you do things that you don't particularly like to do. And it's an inconvenience. And sometimes you do them over and over and over to make their life better or to get through situations. But that's what loving, caring servants do. And the reward is worth it. That's why you do something that you'd still be considered worthless. Basically, what am I going to get out of it? That's what motivates us. What am I going to get out of it? Well, the eternal reward is for sure what you'll get out of it. Can you imagine the Lord, Matthew 25:21, Master says to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You've been faithful over little, I'll set you over much. Enter in the joy of your master. When I see that crazy little picture, I don't know where that came from, but it looks like a little fairy tale story of the girls, doesn't it? And tables, and it looks beautiful. It does. You can kind of fall into that and look in that and think, it's going to be beautiful. How beautiful heaven must be if we live this way versus the eternal punishment. So as we review some of the things we said today, we want to go from being useless to useful. That's what we want to do. Onesimus was useless. That's how we started. We saw that there was good for nothing. There were people that were good for nothing, worthless by their words even. Not just their, if you will, behavior. Words made worthless. We saw about being salt and light. And if you lose your saltiness, you're worthless. Stand up. Be virtuous. Be something for God. Be useful. You can be a vessel for God, an honorable vessel, special dish. Use your talents for Him and have an active faith, if you will. Have an active faith for the Lord. And it's our duty. The Lord deserves it. He deserves our active faith. So I'll give the lesson to you with that hopefully being useful. Here's the plan of salvation that you're hearing. And hopefully you hear about this Lord and Savior that's real. And He wants you to serve. He loves you. And your life will be better. But even more important, the afterlife, the reward at the end of time, mansions and all that stuff. So if we can help anybody obey or whatever, you can let it be known as we stand and sing our invitation song.